Next is Dr. Anastasiya Nestsiarovich, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center, Department of Internal Medicine, Center for Global Health. She received her MD from the Belarusian State Medical University in 2011, and there she also completed a clinical internship in psychiatry and addiction medicine in 2012 and practiced psychiatry for 5 years as a physician and researcher, performing epidemiological, psychometric, and biological studies in mental health. After obtaining her PhD in 2016, she joined the multidisciplinary team headed by Dr. Christoph Lambert at the University of New Mexico. She served as a key investigator in several of the largest comparative effectiveness studies on bipolar disorder and continues to work on large-scale observational studies on psychotropic drugs used in bipolar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the OHDSI committee for providing us with this opportunity to present our research, which is one of the largest research in the world on comparative effectiveness of bipolar disorder pharmacotherapies. So we compared more than 100 of psychotropic drugs for the risk of diabetes mellitus. You can see this is our research team, and Dr. Christoph Lambert is the principal investigator there. I'm a postdoctoral fellow. So in this study, we analyzed large administrative claims database, IBM Market Scan database, which covered the period from 2003 to 2015, and it has the information on about 1 million of people with bipolar disorder. So we had all the data about the visits of patient to provider, about the drug prescriptions filled, about the procedures and the lab orders and the diagnosis, and the data was transformed to the OMOP common data model. So this is not the only study that we ran. With this design, we also ran several comparative effectiveness studies, one on diabetes mellitus, one on kidney disorders, one on self-harm, and on psychiatric hospitalization. So as a result, we published 2 papers. One is accepted to JAMA Journal, and one is under review. So for this study on diabetes mellitus, we only selected adult people with at least 2 diagnoses of bipolar disorder, which we observed during the period from 2003 to 2015. And they all must receive at least 1 drug for bipolar disorder, like 1 psychotropic drug, either antidepressant, mood stabilizer, lithium, or antipsychotic of 1st, 2nd, or 3rd generation. So we excluded people with other serious mental disorders like schizophrenia, people with neurological conditions, those with dementia, and also people who took insulin or they were diagnosed with any glucose-related disorder. So we wanted to make sure that there are no obvious biological reasons for the person to develop diabetes, right? So he should be diabetes naive, he or she. So this is our design. As you see, we start the observation in 2003. Then we request 1 minimal year of observation, and then goes the index visit. So that's the outpatient or inpatient visit when the first time we see diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Then goes index exposure, which could be no drug, like nothing at all, no pharmacotherapy, could be 1 drug, 2, 3, and so on, many drugs. And then we follow them up to one of the following events occur. Either they develop diabetes mellitus, which is our outcome of interest, or they are censored, like end of data, or they had hospitalization unrelated to diabetes, because we didn't have the data on what drugs they were taking inside the hospital or emergency room. So we stopped the clock in this case. So we only selected drug regimens which were common enough to study. So it was at least 1,000 treatment exposure periods, at least 5 diabetes outcomes per regimen. And initially we have more than 600 regimens, then we collapsed them into 102. And some drugs were studied individually, some were classes, and we also studied combinations of 2, 3, and 4 classes of psychotropic drugs. So in the end, when we collected all the data, we ran Cox regression model, and we compared 102 regimens to no drug, so no pharmacotherapy at all. And we controlled our model for 85 pre-treatment covariates, such as concomitant drugs other than drugs of interest, comorbid disorders, procedures, hospitalizations, and so on. So as a result, we got the data on more than 500,000 of people with bipolar disorder, and about 4% of them developed diabetes mellitus. And the average observation time was about 1 year. And we can see that annual incidence of diabetes was 10 times higher than we usually see in general US population. So it was very high, like 3%. So this is the regression model. I only show you the top of the table, which is sorted by hazard ratio values. And you can see that some drug had significantly higher risk of diabetes compared to no drug, especially polypharmacy, like many drugs are used simultaneously, and antipsychotic containing drugs. This is the lower part of the table, so there are certain regimens with significantly lower risk of diabetes compared to no drug. This is the hierarchy of polypharmacy that we built. So all those clouds are drug regimens. They are classified according to the level of complexity of the treatment regimen. So you can start with no drug, and then you go lower to 1, 2, 3, and 4 drugs. And the arrows are just relationships, and you can see the hazard ratio between each of the cloud. So the essence, the message that is reflected here, when you start with no drug and then you move down to 1 drug, they can be either more risky or less risky for diabetes. But if you go down to 2, 3, and 4 drugs, the hazard ratio values are rising. So the more drugs you add to the combination, to the treatment regimen, the higher is the risk of diabetes compared to no drug. So the conclusion is there is almost 3-fold difference in diabetes risk between different psychotropic drug regimens used in bipolar disorder treatment. And there were certain drugs with lower risk and higher risk, like antipsychotic containing regimens or polypharmacy. And finally, I should mention some limitations of the study. So it was an observational study. We could not randomly assign patient to treatment groups. We also could not control for the data that were absent in the database, like the lifestyle, which is important for development of diabetes, or like family history, ethnicity. So the baseline risk could still be different among people when they were included in the database. And we didn't control for number of drugs used prior to the index exposure of interest, and for dosage of drugs, as well as release mechanism and route of administration. And no drug was selected as the comparator, which implies that there could be some indication bias, because people who are treated with medications probably are more severely sick than those who are just treated with psychotherapy, for example. So if you're interested in our study, you can visit our poster, number 77, right after this lightning talk session. Thank you so much.